The recorder clicked on with a soft hum as Zixara settled her six-limbed frame into the specialized chair. Her chitinous exoskeleton bore the scars of countless battles, and her compound eyes reflected the sterile light of the rehabilitation center. The fluorescent bulbs above buzzed with an electric intensity that seemed to mirror the tension building in the room.
Yes. State your designation and service record, the interviewer prompted.
His voice steady but carrying an undertone of anticipation. The weight of what was about to be revealed hung heavy in the air. Zixthera, S. Breathing apparatus wheezed slightly as she adjusted her position. The chair creaked under her alien form, a sound that seemed almost human in its familiarity. Zixthara, combat specialist, 47th Hive Fleet, served in the Terran conflict from Cycle 2387 to 2394. 7 years of what you call hell. Her mandibles clicked nervously, a sound like breaking glass in the silence. The interviewer's pen stopped, moving across his notepad. 7 years. Most alien veterans lasted maybe 2 cycles before requesting transfer. This creature before him had endured nearly 4 times that duration. You were there from the beginning? I was there when we first encountered them. When we learned that some prey fights back, the words came out like a confession, each syllable weighted with regret and something else, something that looked disturbingly like fear. Here's the thing about predators. They're not used to being afraid. For millions of cycles, the Hive Fleet had swept across the galaxy like a cosmic storm. Planet after planet fell before their superior technology in overwhelming numbers. They were the apex predators of space, the ultimate hunters, or so they believed. The interviewer leaned forward, sensing the gravity of what he was about to hear. Tell me about your first engagement with humans. Zixthera's antennae twitched a involuntary response that betrayed her inner turmoil. Even now, years after the war's end, the mere mention of that first encounter sent ripples of anxiety through her nervous system. We thought it would be simple. Intelligence reported a species barely past their industrial age, soft-bodied, slow. No natural weapons. She paused, her compound eyes seeming to look through the walls of the rehabilitation center, back to that fateful day when everything changed. Our strategists compared them to the Velthania, you know, those peaceful traders from the Outer Rim, who surrendered after we destroyed just one of their cargo ships. Command expected similar results. The interviewer nodded, familiar with the Velthani campaign. It had lasted exactly 47 minutes from first contact to complete surrender. What made you think humans would be different? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Zixthora's voice dropped to almost a whisper. That was our first mistake. We approached Earth's outer territories with the same casual confidence we'd shown everywhere else. Same formation, same tactics, same arrogant assumption that victory was inevitable. But here's what the Hive Fleet didn't understand about humans and. This is crucial, they had never encountered a species that viewed conflict as evolution in action. Every other race they'd conquered saw war as something to be avoided, survived, or endured. Humans saw it as something to be won, no matter the cost. The preliminary scans were routine, Zixthera continued, her voice gaining strength as she delved deeper into the memory. Primitive weapons, basic defensive systems, scattered populations. By every metric we used to measure military capability, they should have been helpless. We were so confident that Command assigned it as a training mission for new recruits. Let out a sound that might have been laughter if it hadn't been so bitter. Training mission. Can you imagine? We were sending children to face the most dangerous predators in the galaxy, and we called it training. The interviewer felt a chill run down his spine. What happened when you made contact? You transmitted the standard surrender demand? Every species receives the same message. Submit to the Hive Fleet. Resistance is futile. Your compliance ensures survival. Simple, direct, effective. It had worked. On 437 worlds, Zixthera's mandibles clicked again, faster this time. The response we received, It wasn't what we expected. Instead of panic or pleading, we got something else entirely. A single transmission from their command center. What did they say? Come and take it. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. 3 words, that's all. No negotiation, no counteroffer, no attempt at diplomacy. Just a challenge. That cut through our assumptions like a plasma blade through flesh. The interviewer's pen had stopped moving entirely. He was leaning forward now, completely absorbed in the narrative. How did your fleet respond? With overwhelming force, naturally. We deployed 3 battle groups over 8,000 warriors. Against what we estimated to be fewer than 200 human defenders scattered across multiple installations, the mathematics were simple. We outnumbered them 40-1. But mathematics, as Zixeta was about to learn, meant nothing when, facing a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history fighting for survival, while the Hive fleet had conquered through superior technology and numbers, humans had evolved through conflict, adaptation, and an almost supernatural ability to turn disadvantage into advantage. The attack began at their dawn. We chose the timing deliberately, thinking it would catch them unprepared. Another mistake, as our dropships descended toward their primary outpost. We expected to see panic, disorder, maybe some scattered defensive fire. Zixtera's voice grew quiet. Again, almost reverent. Instead, we saw something that changed everything. They were ready. Not just ready, they were eager. You could feel it in the air, this electric anticipation. They wanted us to come. We were so very wrong about everything. The statement hung in the air like a prophecy of doom, and as Zixtera prepared to recount the horror that followed, one thing became crystal clear. The Hive fleet hadn't just encountered another species to conquer. They had awakened something that would hunt them across the stars. What happened next would reshape the balance of power in the galaxy forever. But that's a story that proves something remarkable about the human spirit and about the compound effect of never giving up, even when facing impossible odds. Speaking of compound effects, if you want to understand how small actions can create massive results over time, check out our next video about the incredible power of compounding. Trust me, after hearing what these humans accomplished, you'll never underestimate the power of persistence again. The assault on Terra Station was supposed to be routine, Zixtera continued, her voice taking on a distant quality that made the interviewer's skin crawl. The way she spoke, it was as if she was watching the events unfold again in real time, like a nightmare that refused to end. 300 of us against maybe 50 humans. We've done this 1,000 times before. On other worlds, her compound eyes seemed to dim as she recalled the confidence they'd felt. The Carillion raids, the Zenthari occupation, the swift conquest of the Malodi colonies, all textbook operations. Clean, efficient, overwhelming. She paused, her breathing apparatus wheezing slightly like an old engine struggling to start. But when we breached their hull, something was different. The very air felt charged with an energy we'd never encountered before. They didn't scatter like other species. They didn't drop their weapons and beg for mercy. They didn't surrender. When faced with superior numbers, here's what you need to understand about that moment. Every other species in the galaxy had responded to the Hive fleet's arrival with predictable patterns. Fear first, then desperate attempts at negotiation, followed by either quick surrender or disorganized resistance that crumbled within hours. The psychological warfare was often more effective than the actual combat. But humans? They had a different response entirely. The first human I saw was a female named Rebecca. Security footage later revealed her identity: Rebecca Martinez Station. Security chief, 34 years old, mother of 2. Zixtera's mandibles clicked as she spoke the name, as if it burned her tongue. She had lost her left arm, red blood streaming down her torso. Any other species would have been dead or unconscious from shock and blood loss. The interviewer leaned forward, captivated despite himself, but she wasn't. She was standing there, with some primitive projectile weapon, screaming at us. Zixtera's voice dropped to almost a whisper. I'll never forget that sound. It wasn't the scream of terror or pain we were used to hearing. It was something else entirely. something that made my combat instincts fire warning signals I'd never experienced before. What was she saying? Come on, you ugly bastards. That's what our translators picked up. But the translation doesn't capture the raw fury in her voice. The absolute refusal to yield. She was dying, outnumbered, facing creatures twice her size with technology she couldn't comprehend, and she was taunting us. Now here's the thing about predators. They're not used to being mocked by their prey. The Hive fleet had spent millennia as the apex hunters of the galaxy. They struck fear into the hearts of entire civilizations. But here was this wounded, human, female, bleeding out on the floor of her station, and she was laughing at them. She killed 7 of my clutchmates before we brought her down. 7. Zixthera's voice carried a mixture of respect and horror. Elite warriors, each with decades of combat experience, taken down by a security guard with a primitive weapon and 1 functional arm. And as she died, she was reloading that weapon with 1 hand. The interviewer's pen had stopped moving. How? Is that possible? We asked ourselves the same question. Later analysis showed that humans possess something we'd never encountered before: the ability to function at peak efficiency, even under extreme duress. Their bodies produce chemicals that actually enhance their combat capabilities when they're injured or threatened. They get stronger as they get more desperate. But Rebecca Martinez wasn't the end of the nightmare. She was just the beginning. Then we heard something that chilled our ichor. More humans deeper in the station, male voice later identified, as Captain Marcus Thompson shouting orders. Make them pay for every inch for Rebecca. The name Rebecca echoed through the station's corridors like a battle cry. And that's when Zixthera realized they weren't just fighting individuals. They were fighting a connected organism that grew stronger with each loss. The sound of that voice, it carried across the station like a sonic weapon. Just the volume. It was the authority, the absolute certainty that his orders would be followed. Even facing impossible odds, even knowing death was likely, he was still commanding his troops. What happened next? Everything changed. The remaining 47 humans transformed from defenders into something else entirely. They weren't just fighting for their lives anymore. They were fighting for Rebecca's memory, for Marcus's leadership, for something bigger than themselves. You see, the Hive fleet had made a critical error in their intelligence gathering. They'd counted humans as individuals, calculating odds based on numbers and firepower. But humans don't fight as individuals. They fight as something greater, collective consciousness driven by shared purpose and mutual sacrifice. The station became a maze of death. Every corridor was a trap, every room a potential ambush. They used their knowledge of the facility's layout to turn our superior numbers against us. But more than that, they used something we'd never encountered before: a coordinated sacrifice. Zixthera's antennae twitched with remembered trauma. A human named Jake, maintenance worker, 26 years old, detonated the station's power core in a section where we'd concentrated our forces. He didn't survive, but he took 63 of my comrades with him, and he was smiling when he did it. Smiling? That's what our helmet cameras recorded. He looked directly at one of our warriors and smiled before pressing the detonator. He was sharing a joke only he understood. The interviewer felt a chill run down his spine. How did your forces respond? With increasing desperation, we'd gone from confident predators to confused prey in the span of 2 hours. Our tactical advantage meant nothing when facing enemies who viewed death as victory if it meant taking us with them. Captain Thompson held the command center for another 3 hours. 3 hours against 237 remaining warriors. When we finally breached the final barricade, we found him surrounded by the bodies of his crew. Still giving orders into a communicator that no longer worked, the silence stretched between them like a chasm. Finally, Zixthera spoke again, her voice barely audible. He looked at me directly and said something that our translators couldn't parse at first. Later, we understood, he said. This is just the beginning. And Marcus Thompson was right. Terra Station wasn't the end of anything. It was the moment the galaxy's most dangerous predators realized they'd awakened. Something that would hunt them across the stars. Something that grew stronger with every battle, more determined with every loss. or unified with every sacrifice. What happened next would prove that the compound effect of human determination could overcome any odds, no matter how impossible they seemed. And if you want to understand how small, consistent actions can create massive results over time, you need to see our next video about the incredible power of compounding. Trust me, after witnessing what these humans accomplished, you'll never underestimate the power of persistence again. After the first engagement, we reported back to command. Surely this was an anomaly, perhaps. These humans were enhanced warriors. Their elite forces. The brass ordered us to proceed with the full invasion. Zixthera's claws scraped against the chair's armrests, leaving deep grooves in the metal. Sound was like nails on a chalkboard, but somehow fitting for what she was about to reveal. High Command dismissed our reports as combat fatigue. Impossible, they said. No primitive species could inflict such casualties on elite hive fleet. Warriors, they accused us of exaggerating, of making excuses for poor performance. The interviewer noticed how her breathing had become more labored, as if the very act of remembering required physical effort. What were your orders? Full planetary assault? Complete subjugation? Standard protocol? Her mandibles clicked with bitter irony. They even sent additional forces, fresh troops, who hadn't witnessed terrastation. Our young warriors eager to prove themselves against what command still believed were inferior opponents. Here's what you need to understand about military hierarchies. They're built on the assumption that information flows accurately from the battlefield to the decision-makers. But sometimes the truth is so far outside expected parameters that it gets filtered out as impossible. The High Fleet's command structure had never encountered anything like humanity, so they simply couldn't process the reality of what their troops had faced. We attacked their mining colony next. Civilians, we were told. Soft targets. Workers and families. Zixthera's voice took on a hollow quality. The intelligence briefing was laughably simple. Asteroid mining facility, 7 Alpha, population, 847, military presence, 0. Expected resistance, minimal to none. Sounds like an easy target. That's exactly what we thought. After terrastation, Command wanted to restore our confidence with a simple victory. Something clean and straightforward to remind us why we were the galaxy's premier military force. She paused, her compound eyes seeming to look through the walls again. We couldn't have been more wrong. The assault began at what the humans called 0600 hours dawn in their artificial day cycle. 2,000 Hive Fleet warriors descended on a mining facility that should have surrendered within minutes. Instead, they found themselves fighting for their lives against enemies who shouldn't have existed. But there were no soft targets among the humans. A male named David fought us with mining equipment, turning industrial tools into weapons of war. David Chen, 38 years old, equipment foreman, father of 3. Zixthera's voice carried a grudging respect. He wielded a plasma cutter like it was a sword, slicing through our armor with the precision of a master craftsman. Think about that for a moment. Here was a man whose job was to cut through asteroid rock, suddenly finding himself face to face with alien invaders. Most species would have dropped their tools and run. David Chen turned his workplace into a battlefield and his equipment into instruments of war. The thing that still haunts me is how quickly he adapted. Within minutes of our arrival, he'd figured out the weak points in our exoskeletons. He moved through our ranks like he'd been training for this moment his entire life. How many did he take down? 14. 14 elite warriors before we managed to overwhelm him, and even then he was laughing, actually laughing as he fought. Zixthera, a Santeni, twitched with remembered confusion. Our psychological analysis team still can't explain that behavior. But David Chen wasn't the most terrifying enemy they faced that day. That distinction belonged to someone who should have been completely helpless in any combat situation. A female called Jennifer Just, a teacher, coordinated the children's evacuation while laying down covering fire. As if Zixthera was still trying to process the impossibility of what she'd witnessed. Jennifer Walsh, elementary school instructor, 29 years old, no military training whatsoever. How does a teacher become a combat coordinator? Is what we asked ourselves. But watching the security footage later, we realized something incredible. She wasn't just protecting those children, she was orchestrating their escape with the tactical precision of a seasoned commander. Every movement calculated, every decision designed to maximize their chances of survival. Here's where it gets really interesting. Jennifer Walsh didn't just grab a weapon and start shooting. She turned the entire mining facility into a chessboard, moving civilians like pieces in a game where the stakes were survival itself. She used the mining tunnels like a military commander would use trenches. She positioned armed civilians at choke points, established supply lines for ammunition, created a communication network using the facility's intercom system. All while teaching 7-year-olds how to crawl through ventilation shafts to safety. The interviewer leaned forward, captivated. She was multitasking warfare and childcare. Exactly. And here's the part that broke our understanding of combat psychology. She was better at both, because she was doing both. The need to protect those children didn't distract her from fighting. It made her fight better, think clearer, move faster. When we began to understand, it wasn't their soldiers we were fighting, it was their entire species. Every human was a potential combatant. They didn't see war as a profession, they saw it as a survival imperative. This realization hit the hive. Fleet like a psychological tsunami. Everything they thought they knew about warfare, about species behavior, about the nature of conflict itself, it all crumbled in the face of human reality. The terror in our ranks was palpable. We had awakened something primal in them, something that turned ordinary humans into nightmares. Zixthera's voice dropped to almost a whisper. A janitor named Bob rigged the facility's waste disposal system into a weapon that took out an entire squad. A cook called Maria turned the cafeteria into a fortress using nothing but kitchen equipment and furniture. Kitchen equipment, apparently? Humans have been using knives for more than just food preparation for quite some time. Maria knew exactly where to cut to disable our life support systems. The bitter irony wasn't lost on Zixthera. She carved through 43 warriors like she was preparing dinner, but the most disturbing realization was yet to come. As the battle raged on, the Hive Fleet forces began to notice something that defied all their understanding of combat: dynamics. The humans weren't just fighting as individuals. They were learning from each other in real time. David's plasma cutter techniques were being copied by others. Jennifer's tactical innovations were spreading throughout the facility. Every human death became a lesson for the survivors. They were evolving during the battle, faster than our tactical computers could process. By the time we'd adapted to one strategy, they'd developed 3 more. It was like fighting an opponent that got smarter with every exchange. The mining facility 7 Alpha engagement lasted 18 hours. When it finally ended, the Hive Fleet had technically won. They controlled the facility. But at what cost? It lost over 800 warriors to a population of 847 civilians. The mathematics were impossible, the implications terrifying. Men still didn't believe our reports. They sent us to the next target, then the next. Each engagement followed the same pattern. Initial confidence, brutal reality, mounting casualties, and the slow realization that we weren't fighting a species, we were fighting a force of nature. And that force of nature was about to teach the galaxy's most feared predators a lesson. In the compound effect of human determination, every battle made them stronger, every loss made them more dangerous. Every victory came at a cost that would eventually break even the mighty Hive Fleet. Speaking of compound effects, what these humans achieved through small, consistent acts of courage and adaptation is exactly what you can accomplish in any area of life. Check out our next video to discover how the power of compounding can transform impossible odds into inevitable success. The siege of New Geneva changed everything, Zixthera whispered, her voice barely audible. The interviewer had to lean forward to catch her words, and even then, he could feel the weight of trauma in every syllable. We had the city surrounded. No supplies, no reinforcements. By all military doctrine, they should have surrendered within days. Her compound eyes reflected the sterile light of the rehabilitation center. But they seemed to be seeing something else entirely, something that still haunted her sleep cycles. New Geneva was their largest civilian population center on the Outer Rim. 2 million inhabitants, mostly families, researchers, merchants, the kind of soft target that should have folded like a house of cards. The interviewer's pen trembled slightly as he wrote, "What made this siege different?" "Everything," Zixthera's breathing apparatus wheezed with the effort of remembering. By this point, we deployed our entire Third Fleet. Over 50,000. Warriors, the largest military force the Hive had ever assembled for a single engagement. We had orbital superiority, energy weapons that could level city blocks, and enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. Here's what you need to understand. About siege warfare, it's supposed to be a war of attrition. You surround the enemy, cut off their supplies, and wait for desperation to do the work for you. Most civilizations surrender within days once they realize the hopelessness of their situation. It's simple mathematics, finite resources versus infinite patience. But humans, as the Hive fleet was learning, didn't follow standard mathematical models. They held out for 8 months. 8 months of the most brutal urban warfare you can imagine. Zixthera's claws scraped against the chair again, leaving fresh gouges in the metal. Led by a human named Colonel James Mitchell, they turned every building into a fortress, every street into a killing field. Tell me about this Mitchell. Career military officer, 42 years old. Veteran of something they called the Martian Border Wars. But those statistics don't capture what he really was. She paused, searching for words that could convey the impossible. He was a conductor, and the city was his orchestra. Every defender, every civilian, every piece of infrastructure, all moving to his rhythm. Colonel James Mitchell had done something that defied every principle of military science. He'd turned a city of civilians into a unified fighting force without destroying their humanity in the process. Children still went to school in underground bunkers. Families still had dinner together between patrol shifts. Life continued, but it continued as warfare. The first month, we expected chaos. Panic. The breakdown of social order that comes with siege conditions. Instead, we found something that still makes our tactical computers malfunction when we try to analyze it. What did you find? Order. Perfect, terrifying order. Mitchell had transformed every citizen into a soldier without making them stop being citizens. A grandmother named Betty ran supply logistics from her basement while teaching her grandchildren how to make explosives. A teenager called Jake delivered messages between defensive positions while maintaining the city's computer network. Think about that for a moment. While the Hive fleet was trying to break their spirit through starvation and bombardment, the humans were building something stronger. They were becoming more than they'd ever been, not less. But the worst part wasn't their tactical brilliance, or their refusal to yield. It was their adaptability. A human engineer named Patricia turned their subway system into a death trap. Zixthera's voice carried a mixture of admiration and horror. Patricia Williams, civil engineer, 35 years old, specialized in urban infrastructure. She knew every pipe, every cable, every tunnel under that city. How did she weaponize public transportation? She didn't just weaponize it, she made it alive. The subway became a circulatory system for the city's defense. Troops could move unseen between sectors, supplies could flow to where they were needed. Most and any of our forces that entered the tunnels, they never came back out. The interviewer felt a chill. What happened to them? We found pieces. Sometimes Patricia had turned the subway into a maze where the walls moved, where gravity shifted, where the very air could become toxic. She'd taken humanity's mastery of their environment and turned it into the ultimate weapon. Patricia Williams wasn't the only civilian who'd become a nightmare. The siege had awakened something in every human defender, transforming ordinary people into extraordinary threats. A mechanic called Robert created improvised weapons from scrap metal that cut through our armor like paper. Thura's mandibles clicked with remembered frustration. Robert Davies, automotive repair specialist, high school dropout, no formal military training. He should have been completely irrelevant to military operations. But he wasn't. He was our worst nightmare. Robert understood metal, understood stress points, understood how things break. He created weapons that shouldn't have existed, using materials that shouldn't have been dangerous. A car part would become a projectile that could pierce our exoskeletons. A kitchen appliance would transform into an explosive that could level a building. Here's what made Robert Davies so terrifying. He wasn't just making weapons, he was teaching others to make them. Every human in the city became a potential weapons manufacturer, turning their daily lives into arsenals of destruction. By the end, we weren't fighting the same species we'd encountered at the beginning. They had become something else. Something. That gave us nightmares even when we were awake. What do you mean? Evolution? Real-time evolution? The humans who survived the first month weren't the same as the ones who'd lived there before the siege. They'd adapted, changed, become something that could thrive in conditions that should have destroyed them. The siege became a laboratory for human potential. Every day brought new innovations, new tactics, new ways of turning disadvantage into advantage. The Hive fleet found themselves fighting an enemy that grew stronger with each passing week. Month. For we realized we weren't winning. We were feeding them. Every attack taught them something new. Every loss made them more dangerous. Every victory came at a cost that made the next battle harder. How did it end? The final assault cost us 12,000 warriors. They lost maybe 200. We won the city, but we had lost the war. Zixthera's voice was hollow, empty. When we finally breached the inner defenses, we found Colonel Mitchell in the command center. Was alone, surrounded by the bodies of his staff, still coordinating resistance that no longer existed. Was he defeated? He looked at me with those human eyes and smiled. Actually smiled. Then he said something that still haunts me. This was just the training exercise. Now you get to face the real military. The fall of New Geneva wasn't humanity's. Defeat it was their graduation. They'd learned everything they needed to know about fighting the Hive fleet. Now they were ready to take the war to the stars, carrying with them the compound effect of 8 months of desperate innovation and unbreakable will. And if you want to understand how that compound effect can transform your own impossible challenges into inevitable victories, you need to see our next video about the incredible power of compounding. Trust me, after witnessing what these humans accomplished, you'll never look at obstacles the same way again. I was relieved from duty after the New Geneva incident. Combat fatigue. They called it, but it wasn't fatigue, it was recognition. We had awakened something that should have been left sleeping. Zixthera's compound eyes seemed to dim, as if the very act of remembering was draining the life from her. The interviewer noticed how her breathing had become shallow, labored like someone carrying a weight too heavy for their frame. The official report listed me as psychologically unfit for continued service. 12 commendations, 43 successful campaigns, and suddenly I was broken goods. What really happened in that final debriefing? I told them the truth. I told High Command that we weren't fighting a species anymore, we were fighting an idea. An idea that had taken root in human consciousness and was spreading faster than any biological virus. She paused, her mandibles clicking with bitter irony. They said I was delusional, suffering from prolonged exposure to primitive psychological warfare. But here's what Zixthera understood that her commanders didn't. Warfare isn't just about destroying your enemy's ability to fight. Sometimes, it's about creating something far more dangerous than what existed before. The Hive fleet hadn't just failed to conquer humanity, they'd accidentally forged them into something unprecedented. The war officially ended 3 cycles ago with the Treaty of Centauri, but it didn't really end. It just ... paused. The humans are still out there, still growing, still learning. And now they know we exist. How do you know they're still preparing? Intelligence reports. Intercepted communications, deep space monitoring stations going dark. Zixthera's voice carried the weight of certainty. They're building something out there. Ships, weapons, technologies that our scientists can't even classify. But more than that, they're building themselves. The Treaty of Centauri had been sold to the Hive fleet as a victory. Humanity agreed to remain within their designated sectors. The Hive fleet would cease all hostile actions, and both species would maintain peaceful coexistence. On paper, it looked like a reasonable compromise. In reality, It was a temporary ceasefire that gave humanity exactly what they needed most: time. Every night, I dream of those names. Rebecca with her one-armed defiance, Marcus rallying his troops, David with his mining laser, Jennifer protecting those children, Colonel Mitchell's tactical brilliance. They haunt me. The interviewer noticed how she spoke their names like an incantation, each one carrying the weight of prophecy. Why do you think they affect you so deeply? Because they weren't soldiers. They were ordinary people who became extraordinary through necessity. And if ordinary humans could do what they did, what do you think their actual military is capable of now? Zixtera's voice dropped to almost a whisper. We gave them the greatest gift any species can receive: worthy opposition. We forced them to become their best selves. Think about that for a moment. Every human who survived the war carried within them the knowledge that they could face impossible odds and win. They'd seen their neighbors transform into heroes there. Communities become fortresses. Their species unite in ways that transcended every previous limitation. People ask me what I learned from fighting humans. I learned that there are predators in this galaxy far more dangerous than anything we ever imagined. And we taught them how to hunt. But surely there's still just one species among many. That's what everyone thinks. That's what I thought before New Geneva. Zixtera's laugh was hollow, devoid of any humor. But you're missing the point. They're not just one species anymore. They're the template for what any species can become when pushed to their absolute limits. Here's the terrifying truth that kept Zixtera awake at night. Humanity hadn't just survived the war. They documented it. Every battle, every innovation, every moment of triumph and tragedy had been recorded, studied, and transformed into teachable knowledge. The human experience was becoming a blueprint for resistance that could spread to every corner of the galaxy. The humans have a saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. We didn't kill them. We made them stronger. We made them angry. We made them united. Are you saying they're planning revenge? Revenge? Mandibles clicked with something that might have been amusement. No, revenge is emotional. What they're planning is far more systematic. They're going to make sure this never happens against them or to anyone else. The interviewer felt a chill run down his spine. What do you mean? They're not building weapons to attack us? They're building weapons to free others. Every species we've conquered, every world we've subjugated, every civilization we've broken, they're all potential allies in a galaxy-wide resistance movement led by the only species that's ever successfully fought us to a standstill. Mark. My words there? Coming. Not for conquest, but for answers. And when they arrive at our worlds, they won't be the same species we first encountered. They'll be something far more terrifying. What could be more terrifying than what you've already described? They'll be survivors. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. They'll have the knowledge of how to fight us, the technology, to match us, and the moral authority to unite every species we've ever wronged. But most importantly, they'll have the compound effect of 70 years of preparation. Zixtera's breathing became more labored, as if the very act of speaking these truths was physically painful. Every day since the treaty, they've been getting stronger. Every innovation builds on the last. Every soldier trained becomes a teacher for 10 more. Every ship built improves on the previous design. And we've been doing what? Celebrating our victory. Convincing ourselves that the treaty proves our superiority, ignoring the reports from our deep space scouts because they don't fit our narrative. Her voice carried the weight of a civilization's denial. We've been telling ourselves comfortable lies while they've been preparing uncomfortable truths. Interviewer realized he was witnessing something unprecedented. Member of the galaxy's most feared military force admitting that they'd met their match. More than that, they'd created their own replacement at the top of the food chain. The reconnaissance reports are classified, but I've seen them. Human ships in sectors we've never explored. Human ambassadors meeting with species we've never heard of. Human technology that makes our best weapons look like toys. Zixtera's compound eyes seemed to focus on something beyond the walls of the rehabilitation center. They're not just preparing for war. They're preparing for transformation. What kind of transformation? The kind that happens when a species realizes it's not alone in the universe, and that the universe is far more dangerous than they ever imagined. They're becoming something that can protect not just themselves, but everyone else who needs protection. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implication. Finally, Zixthera spoke again, her voice barely audible. I used to be proud of being part of the Hive Fleet. We were the apex predators of the galaxy. Now I lie awake at night, knowing that we've created something that makes us look like scavengers. And the worst part? I'm not sure I want us to win anymore. The recording ended there, but the story was far from over. Within hours of this interview, every major intelligence agency in the galaxy would be analyzing these words, trying to understand what they meant for the future of interstellar relations. Asterisk, the rehabilitation center's files were sealed shortly after this interview. Thera was found dead in her quarters the following morning, cause unknown. The interviewer's notes contained only one additional entry. Recommend immediate strategic review of human collective relations. We may have created our own extinction. Asterisk, and perhaps that's the most powerful lesson of all. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from destroying your enemies, but from forcing them to become something better than they ever thought possible. The compound effect of human determination had created something unprecedented in galactic history, a species that could transform opposition into opportunity, in conflict into connection. If you want to understand how that same compound effect can transform your own challenges into stepping stones to greatness, check out our next video about the incredible power of compounding. Trust me, after witnessing what these humans accomplished, you'll never underestimate what's possible when you refuse to give up. The end.